Hello, everyone. Welcome to SigNoz Launch Week. Thanks for tuning in. In the next few hours and days, you will hear from our maintainers some of the cool new features which we have worked on in the last few weeks and what motivated them to work on them. Why we wanted to do a launch week. As developers, we always love shipping products and getting feedback from our community. But many times, we don't get the under the hood story of what drove that feature, what people who are building them are excited about, and what's coming next. In this launch week, we wanted to share that with our community and users and wanted to get feedback from you guys. And hence, we thought it would be good to share our story with you and see what you have to say. In the next coming week, each section of our maintainers who own different modules, will be sharing what they are working on, what they have worked in the past, and what they are thinking about on building next. Please go through them and would love your feedback on what we have built, good, bad, or ugly, and even feedback on what we should be building next. Please join our Slack community and share your feedback there. I'll share our link to the Slack community in our notes. As the first feature we want to launch with on day one, we are showcasing Log Explorer, which we have been working on for last few weeks. And Nitya from our tech team will take you through how we thought about it, what are the key performance and UX improvement we made, and what are the things which are coming next. Also, we will have Swam, who has worked on the UX part, on what are the key challenges which comes with designing such products and how we thought about it. Do tune in and enjoy. Thank you. Hey Nitya, welcome to SigNoz
Hi,
Launch
Pranay.
Week. How are you feeling?
Hi, Pranay. Yeah, I'm feeling good. Excited to be here and talk about all the things we have built at SigNoz for dogs.
Cool. So let's get started. Maybe to start with, you can introduce yourself, what you have been working on, and what has been your background.
Yeah. So I joined at SigNoz about 2 years ago. Started my first work on building the logs part of the product, and I'm like excited. Ki, okay, what you have built over the past 2 years, I can show it right now. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. So I think we have done a lot of works on logs, primarily around improving how the Explorer looks, what type of things people can do with logs.
Right.
Why do you think logs is important for observability? Because whenever you discuss about observability, one of the first thing which people start with are logs. That hey, and like even for any startup, right? And the first thing they want to get visibility on that is to start sending some logs and then go from there. So why, according to you, logs is crucial for observability?
Yeah. So out of all the three signals that we have, logs is the easiest one to start with, and all the legacy systems have it. Like logs has the biggest legacy that you have ever seen. Like if you even for a developer, like let's say they are trying to build a new application, for getting into any kind of issue or debugging any kind of issue, as the first step they will add logs, and then later on they will add metrics and then traces. So logs is something that is very easy to get started with and gives you like gives you an overview of what the system is going through. Like if an issue occurs or something happens, it will just be descriptive enough to like give you all the information. So it's a very good starting signal for basically debugging your applications.
Yeah, I think like the three signals for observability we talk about generally are metrics, logs, and traces. What I have seen is that people first start with logs then
Right.
move to metrics when they want to do more aggregation, and then do get to traces when they have like multiple services and then they want to see how requests are going, etc. And logs you can send from like different type of system, right? It's not just like services we send logs or machines we send logs. Even things like router can send logs. So why what difficulties does this present? Because as you said, it's a very the first thing which people start with, and also it supports like lots of things. Like you can generate logs from anything, even electrical machines. You can generate logs from even any devices. You can uh, generate logs from, right? What difficulties that present?
Yeah. So if we start with difficulties, so as we know, logs is the easiest to start with, right? Now, if an application developer starts building an application, like logs has the issue key, anyone can follow any kind of format, because of which the format for different kind of logs is totally different. Like even for the same team, it might happen key one developer is using one kind of format for building one application, while other developer is using a different kind of format for building the other application. Now, once those are like applications are built, they are deployed in different manner. So some are deployed in Kubernetes, some are deployed in Docker, some are deployed even in bare metal. So with this, another issue comes is like where is the application deployed and how do you send logs to a generic
Hmm.
log collection system? So there are two problems. One is the formatting of logs. Anyone can generate logs in any format they want, and where they are like getting generated. They can be generated in any kind of system. Now, to build a generic logging system, you will need a system which is basically able to understand logs from different sources as well as different formats, and provide you a explorer which will basically allow you to go through logs of different formats and different sources. So that's the basically the features that should be present in a good log explorer
Yeah,
logging
yeah.
system.
In a way, the flexibility which logs provides makes it difficult to analyze it properly, and also like how do you send data, this logs data from different places, and then how do you analyze it, right? Because as you said, we can send any text in a log, but to
Right.
do some analysis on that, it's important that you sort of it is formatted well, and then the system is able to perform queries on it. So I think that's like the core challenge which you rightly pointed out about logs. Cool. So let's start with like what we have been working on. If you want to show something which you have been building, would be great.
So even before I show like what you have been building at SigNoz, I want to basically show how we can send logs to SigNoz. Okay. So if you see, there are various methods with which we can send logs to SigNoz. Like if you see one of these examples, the first one is where an application is running, it is writing logs to some intermediary system, like a file or some std out pipe. Now what happens is there is a collector which reads those logs from the intermediary medium and then sends it to SigNoz. So this is one of the uh, process through which you can send logs to SigNoz. Now other one is basically using some kind of agents, different kind of agents. Here the same thing happens, that is basically an application sends or writes logs to some intermediary medium, and then some agent picks up. An example of these agents might be FluentBit, FluentD, Logstash. So these are existing agents which are present in the system, and they can read logs from the intermediate medium and then send it to OpenTelemetry collector, which will then in turn send it to SigNoz. And the last one that we can see is basically your application directly sending logs to SigNoz. In this case, your application will be using a SDK, that is the OpenTelemetry SDK, which will basically batch your logs and then send it to a SigNoz. So these are the three different ways in which you can basically send logs to SigNoz. Now let's see what the log explorer page at SigNoz looks like. So if I go to logs page, so this is the log explorer homepage for SigNoz. Now here you can see different components. One is the histogram that we see here. Now this indicates the count of logs which were basically ingested in the last 30 minutes. And then here you can see your log lines. Now you can click on one of these log lines and it will give you an expanded view. Now this view contains the entire log line, that is the body, and all the attributes that are attached to it. So in this case, since this is a JSON log, the different attributes are parsed, and then we can see those attributes here, that is status, level, method. So these are parsed from this log line. Okay. Now there are more options available in our Explorer, that is the time series and the table. Now this helps you basically aggregate your data. Now before going here, I just want to show you the filtering capabilities. So let's say this is your search filter. Here you can basically search on different attributes that you have extracted. So in this case, if I do method, I'll get some suggestions and get. And then if I stage and run query, I'll get all the logs which has the method get. Now if I open one of this, you can see the method is get. Okay. Now this is the search filter. Now there is one more feature that we have, that is the query builder. Now this gives you some advanced features. So in this case, I am filtering all the logs with method get, and then I can do some aggregations on top of it. Like let's say, in this case, I will change it to time series. And then I can do like count of logs where basically method is get. And then you can do other things like average of any kind of attribute. So in this case, average of status, right? So in this case, average is like 200. So, and then you can view the same data in a tabular format as well. So this is the tabular format. So this helps you go through different kind of logs and then aggregate them so that you can get like to your desired output. In this case, you want to find the average of the status.
Can you talk about more on like what is the difference between a time series view here and a table view?
So in time series view, it's the same data, but just in a time series format. You will see like how your data changes per minute. So in this case, it's the same. Let me see if I can get some other value. Let's get count. Count is also similar. Method get. Let me remove this. Yeah. So this is the change of count. So in this case, we can see this is the change of count per minute, which was calculated, and this is how it changed. So this is how time series help. Now, if I change this to table view, it will be a total count over this time range. So that's the difference between the time series and the table view.
So it's an aggregation over the time period, like the complete time period.
Right. Yeah, it's the total value, while time series is the value aggregated per minute over the time interval.
Got it.
Right. Now, once you have your logs here, you can also relate it with traces. So in this case, let me go to the traces page. Now I can see one of this trace. Like here, duration is like this milliseconds. I want to open this trace. Now I want to see if there are any logs which are related to this trace. So in this case, I will go to go related logs. I will click here, and this will give me all the logs which are related to this trace. And we can see all these logs which were related. So if I open this, we can see the trace ID which you used. From here also, you can go back to the trace. Yes. Now the next thing that I want to show is so once you have your log, if it's a JSON log, right, then you can directly filter it. So in this case, since my body is a JSON, I can directly filter it using that. So I can do filter for gap. So this is one of the capabilities that are recently added where you can query your JSON logs directly before even extracting it.
Yeah. So this can become very powerful, right? So you don't need to create any attribute from your JSON. You can just use like go to that body field and click that, and then be able to get that like query based on that JSON attribute.
Right, exactly. It can be very like very useful in cases where you want to get something out. So we are working on some more features where basically we want to make it more performant, so that you can run these queries like JSON queries over a longer duration of time or more amount of logs. Yeah.
How can people create dashboards from these logs and trace alerts from these logs? How does that flow look like? Because many times people would want to say monitor logs which has errors coming, right? And then you want to throw alerts if that number of log lines becomes very high.
Right. So in this case, let's say, okay, let me go to the time series view. So in this case, I am doing a last 1 hour. Let me remove the filter. So I'm doing count over the last 1 hour, right? Let's say I want to add this panel to some dashboard. What I will do here is there is an option here where I can do add to dashboard. And then I can create a new dashboard or select an existing one. So in this case, I will create a new dashboard. And then this graph will appear here. Now, this is a very simple example where I'm just getting the count, but you can do complex aggregations like error rate or something else. So I can just type a title here, count of logs time series. And then I've got a panel where I can see my count of logs over time. And in the same way, let's say I want to create an alert. Now here, this alert, I'm just using the count, where it's giving me the count. And I can say, okay, if the count of logs goes beyond 10 during the last 5 minutes, give me an alert. So I don't have a notification channel configured now, but once you configure the notification channel, you can create the alert and then test it out. But in this case, this is my threshold, that is 10, and this is my count. Now, anytime this graph goes beyond this threshold, an alert will be created and you will be notified. So that's how you can basically create alerts and dashboards from logs. Now, one more option that we have added is basically, now let's say you have created a filter that is method get, right? And in this case, this is a simple like one filter. Now, let's say you have a case where you have multiple filters that you have added and you don't want to type it again and again, right? So in this case, you can just save this view. Get. Okay. Now, let's say you went somewhere else, came back, okay, and then you can basically select your views. Now, if you select this, you'll already get the pre-filled filters. Now, this helps when you have filters that have multiple components in it, and then you can just select here and go to that view directly.
Got it. So what are the new changes you have made? So SigNoz had Logs Explorer for some time, but what are the new changes you have made in this launch?
So in this launch, we have basically updated how the design looks like, how these are rendered, and also the detail page, like how this detail page is rendered. So in this case, you have seen that we have showed a body differently, and the attributes are arranged in a different manner. So previously, body was just shown here, and then with this new design, it uses the area more efficiently. And you also changed how we view context. So in this case, you can just go to context. Since this is the latest line, there are no new data, but you can see the older data related to this line. So this has changed. Apart from that, what we have added is we have made it simpler. So previously we just had the entire query builder. Now this is not useful for everyone, since in most cases you would just want to filter some of your logs. So by default, we just have the filter query. And also we added the option to hide this histogram. So in some cases, users don't like to have this histogram to save screen space. So in this case, you can just hide it using this toggle button.
Got it. And I think lots of this has been driven by what we have been hearing from our customers and users, right? That
Right,
hey,
right.
like for example, the body example which you showed, where if a body field is very big, then it would take a lot of space. And now,
Right.
because it's a section on its own, we can use the space and optimize the users more efficiently.
Exactly.
So, one thing which I was curious was how has OpenTelemetry impacted, or like, because OpenTelemetry has come like is a recent standard, and as you mentioned, logs has been there for a lot of time. And recently, OpenTelemetry, the logs SDKs became GA. Like people can now use logs in production environment. What has been the change in the logs management space because of coming of OpenTelemetry? What are the key changes it introduced?
Right, right. So this is some of the, if you see, let me share my other tab. Give me a second. So OpenTelemetry helped us in a way where it basically created the generic model for log. So if you see this page, so here is a standard log model that is defined by OpenTelemetry. We have various fields here like timestamp, observer timestamp, trace ID, span ID, then also body, resource attributes, and attributes. Now with this model, what it has provided is like they have provided various tools through which you can map any kind of log to this model. Now what it helps is like once you have a standard model for all kind of logs, you can build systems where you can create a data, you can aggregate the data since the model is same.
So, primarily, it helps in like creating more tooling, which like you can assume that there's an underlying model in which your logs are coming, and in that
Okay.
way, you can like it helps you to um, define things more easily. Is that the main thing, or is the main thing that it enables correlation much easier because now you have a standard resource attribute which you can like correlate between metrics traces? What are the
Yeah.
key advantages you see here?
Yeah. One is correlation. The main issue they are solving here is the standardization of the model. Like since different kind of applications or different kind of sources generate different logs in different formats, it's very difficult to build a generic logging solution where you can basically filter all those different kind of logs. Example will be, let's say if you're deploying on your application on Kubernetes, will have some attributes such as your pod name or your deployment name, which you will use to filter those applications,
Mm.
right? And let's say if your application is deployed on Docker, you will have attributes like container ID, container name, which will use to filter those application logs. Now, what
Yeah.
OpenTelemetry has done is, let's say you're receiving logs from both the sources, and then it has provided tools through which you can parse those log lines, extract certain fields, and then map it to this log model, which will basically help
Got,
you to store it in a generic system.
got it.
Yeah,
So making this log model like universal log model is the main one of the key things which OpenTelemetry has done. And I also
right,
recall you talked about the searching power in SigNoz, right? When you're showcasing your logs explorer.
right.
Can you share more about like how does that work at scale? Like, for example, one of the key things, like, the problems really come when you're trying to say search in terabytes of logs and trying to see how that works, and what are the things we have learned from our users, and what are the optimizations you have made so to ensure that searching experience is fast and users can see what data they want to see much faster.
Yeah, so I think we can stop the screen sharing. But how I want to talk about this is at SigNoz, we use ClickHouse. Now, ClickHouse is a very fast columnar database. So, what we do is once you send your logs to us, you can extract different attributes from your log lines. Now, once you have extracted those different attributes from your log lines, you can search
Hmm.
on them. Now your first problem is solved, where you have basically extracted attributes. You can filter your logs and you can find the log lines that you want to see. Now the next problem comes is where you want to basically aggregate or search over a longer duration. Let's say like last 1 week, where it will be like millions of log lines or even billions, right? Now in this case, what ClickHouse provides is like once you have those extracted attributes, you can materialize and index them.
Hmm.
With this, what you can do is you can filter those log lines very fast. Now once you have done that, there are more features that we have explored. Like some users wanted to run some queries like over longer duration, and even indexing was not helpful because the amount and the volume was quite high and the data was not that granular, like the cardinality was low. So example of cardinality will be like a trace id is very highly cardinal, and ClickHouse is very good at finding highly cardinal data over a longer duration. Example is like, let's say if you want to find a trace id over the last 1 week, since it's a very high cardinal data, ClickHouse will find it like in a very less amount of time. While with
And
lower cardinal data,
you that is because you can skip many scanning
granules.
granules which you know that doesn't have that.
Right, right. So
Right.
ClickHouse is very fast at estimating where the data is not present. Right. So in this
Hmm.
case, like it can pinpoint to the data where it is present. But the issue comes up where your cardinality is low. Example will be like deployment name or service name. So in this case, ClickHouse provides something known as projections, which will basically allow you to rearrange your data so that your queries are faster. So in some of the use
Got it.
cases, a projection with service name is very useful because most of the users filter their logs by service name. Now, if you have already arranged your data by service name, the searches are quite faster.
Hmm.
And this is the upcoming
Got
feature in a product where we are basically exploring how you can provide this to the users so that they can take decisions on their own.
Got it. So how users can create their own projections or create their own
Right.
indexation. Basically, how can we enable users to make their querying much faster if they know this is a type of the querying they will do, and how can make them much more efficient?
Exactly.
Interesting.
So basically, one of the good examples here is like there can be two teams in an organization, and then their query patterns is similar for the same team, but it's different for the between the two teams. Like one team uses service name, severity text, and then error, and while the other team uses like deployment name, severity text, and something else. So in this case, the both team will have different projections for which they can search.
Got it. Got it. And while showing your demo, you also shared bit on the like how you can see logs in context, right? How does
Right.
that actually help developers in debugging? Or like, why did we spend so much effort in building that feature? I think it would be
Yeah.
great if you can
So
share a bit more about that.
yes, yes. So one of the main problems with the generic logging system is since you extract attributes from different logs, for example, application one is also having the attribute service name, or let's say error message, and application 2 is also having the attribute name error message, right? And the error message can be same for logs coming from different applications. Now if you search for the error message, logs from both the applications will appear, right?
Got
Now
it.
with in context, what happens is, let's say you select a log line and then you click on view on context. Now view on context will give you application logs from that system only. So in this case, if you click view on context for application one, it will only give you the previous and the next logs for application one. So in this case, you can debug easily. Where, yeah, basically that's the problem with generic logging systems, which can be solved through view in context.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. Cool. So sounds like we have really worked on some of the interesting features and making logs more usable for our users. What are the next upcoming features you are working on or excited about to ship?
Right, right. So one of the main ones that we are working on is basically faster JSON search. So you want users to, like, let's say they send JSON logs, like with minimal effort, they should be able to search faster. That is something that we are working on. We are also working on like how we can support projections in our uh, so that different teams can utilize different kind of searches for building dashboards or alerts. And then we are also working on like pipelines, which I think Raj is already will be giving a demo on. So pipelines is something that we are still working on and like getting user feedback. Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Sounds pretty interesting. Thanks for sharing this with everybody, and all the best for next launch week.
Yeah. It was great talking with you. So, yeah, Pranay.
Cool. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hey Shivam, welcome to SigNoz launch week.
Hey Pranay, I'm glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm pretty excited to talk about the things that we have been working on SigNoz for a while now, and I'm excited to talk about it in front of users and show them what's coming up next.
Cool. Excited. So maybe we can start with you introducing a bit about yourself. Let our
Mhm.
viewers know more about you.
Okay, so my name is Shivam, and I take care of the entire design side of SigNoz. Um, like I have been fascinated with developer tooling from pretty early age, and I have kind of, as a former, I was trained in computer science, so as a former engineer, I have gone through the pain of figuring out, okay, this is the developer, this is the tooling you need to actually get something done. And for me, growing up, it has been a healthy diet of rolling your own tools a lot of times. So whenever I'm at SigNoz, I kind of feel, okay, this is what the developer is going through. This is what they might need to be helped with. This is what we can make easier for them. Because let's face it, when we're living in an era where there's a new JavaScript framework and a new foundational model every other week. So you would want to help reduce the friction of developers in whatever little way you can at every single point in time. And it's fun. It's really fun to work on, deeply complex technical products because you also get to use your computer science training and actually drill down deep into the concepts, make sure you figure out how you can abstract things out in a more simplified way to the user. And that's a really exciting challenge and a fun problem to solve anytime.
Interesting. You mentioned that you have like trained formally as a computer science engineer.
Mm-hmm.
What interested you into design? Like why not pursue being a software developer?
Um, so I think I was more of a artsy kind of a kid. So I was super into like doodling, painting, photography, and all of that. And I think it was like around 12 or 13 years back uh, when I heard about this guy called Nick D'Aloiso who had created an app called Samly, which he had, I, if I'm not wrong, he had sold it to Yahoo at that point in time. And that kind of made me wonder, like, oh, what if I create small software tools, like small software which would just serve my purpose, if not everybody else's. If I want a to-do app, why do I need to use a to-do app that everybody uses? So why can't I roll my own and add enhancements that I would want to exist? So instead of having to file an issue and wait for the developers to respond or bake that into their product 3-4 years later, why can't I build my own tooling, right? So
Interesting.
at that point in time, I had started sketching out, interface ideas, things that I kind of wanted to see on screen on pieces of paper. And at that point, my programming knowledge was limited to, just writing public static void main on Java and like just writing a whole Java class on BlueJ and compiling it and figuring out what works and what does not. And at that point in time, I wanted to get into more into engineering because I didn't want to wait for other people to build what I was imagining uh,
Hmm.
and having a bunch of ideas versus not knowing how to build it is a very wide chasm which I was not super comfortable with. So I think I was in around grade 9 grade 8 or 9 when I got a bunch of books that started teaching me HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's where I picked it up from. And thereafter, computer science concepts that we were studying in school started getting really interesting. Like you actually start learning about sorting algorithms. You actually start learning about pathfinding algorithms. You actually start to solve interesting problems. And at that point, it became quite clear to me that this is a field I want to be in. Also because when I got my first computer like 10, 11 years back, it was sort of a magical feeling to realize how malleable software can be, to the extent where you can, if you're using something like say a browser like Google Chrome, you don't need to always stay like box yourselves into stay with the features that Chrome has shipped for you. You can simply write an extension to do a thing that you have been wanting Chrome to do for a while. And this sort of extensibility, or like having the super power to kind of write your own customization whenever you need it, kind of drove me towards computer science. It's been a while, but I, even as a designer now, I still love going back to and reading my book on crafting an interpreter, or like learning about how memory allocation is handled in C. And so yeah, it's been a really fun experience learning the nitty-gritties of how humans technically made memories and dreams out of like silicon and metals. It's a really fascinating field to be in.
Yeah, I think the power to understand how something gets built, like what you design and how that actually gets built, I think that gives you a lot of context on how you should also design, right? For example, if you understand a design which you make, how will developers actually develop it or like code it, you will have like much better understanding of like what to build or like how to share with developers and what they can build. So I think that's really a superpower.
That
Cool.
really
So
helps. Yeah, that really helps also because like after like I know as designers sometimes we tend to kind of go over the board with what we're designing, often forgetting to take into consideration okay, if I stack like 5 gradients on top of each other, would that affect the performance of this page? And if you learn and design formally, you hardly ever ask these questions because you have not been exposed to the sort of scenarios that lead to the scenarios happening, right? So for instance, when like 3.5, 4 years back, I joined this company who operated physical classrooms, right? And then the pandemic struck, and all the classrooms had to be shut down, and we had to ship like an online classroom platform in like 2 months. And we wanted to do it because at the end of the day, we did not like how Google Meet and Zoom worked, and we were like, hey, classrooms should be fun. And while building that product out, we realized, okay, if you're building a web app on top of WebRTC, you probably can't use too many lotties for loading states in that page because the page performance is going down, and probably, and not probably, everybody who's using the product probably doesn't have like a high-powered MacBook to, not sweat at all if you're like having having to maintain a WebRTC connection and like playing like 5, 6 different lotties on screen. So it genuinely helps. It genuinely helps to know a lot of these considerations that usually do not come into the picture while you are traditionally designing. But having awareness about what can go wrong and what are the edgy things you should avoid sometimes to build a better experience for your users.
fair enough. Nice. So you have been working on some pretty cool features in SigNoz. What are you gonna show us today?
I think I would. So one thing we are launching today in the course of the launch week is our new Logs Explorer. And the Log Explorer is basically a much better way to actually skim through your logs, figure out what has gone wrong, what has not gone wrong. There are a bunch of really cool things that we have in the pipeline. Not, I wouldn't say everything is made to a product yet, but the engineers are working really hard on a lot of things, and a lot of this really small quality of life improvements that you probably wouldn't even notice until you notice it's not there, would soon be making your way into into the product. And I think that would be of tremendous help to customers and our users in order to make a better use of their observability products and figure out what's going on, where are their services failing, and things like that. So I would just take you through our new Log Explorer once and talk through a couple of things that we have been doing. So when we initially started redesigning this new Log Explorer, one of our main sort of North Stars was essentially for it to be extremely data dense, because whenever you're using a product like this, you want it to have as many log lines crammed into a single line as possible. But while you're looking to make it data dense, you would also have to keep in mind about how the data should not be too much so that it overwhelms the user, and so much that it affects readability and things like that. I recently read somewhere that somebody who was designing, they had gotten a feedback from a user once upon a time that, hey, if you remove all the padding from all the elements on the screen, you'd probably be able to cram more things into the UI. But the end goal is like that's not the point, right? It always has to be a fair balance. So when we shipped the new Log Explorer, we made a whole new time picker for you so that it becomes easier for you to define what time range you want to see your logs for. We made it easier for you to change the formatting, to change the columns that are visible, change the different ways the logs actually get rendered, and you can simply select the one that actually appeals to you. You also have a histogram here which shows you, okay, whenever you have a specific query, how does that translate into a course of time, and how it actually, and over a period of time, you'd also be able to see zones in this chart, in this histogram, which are highlighted in amber or red, because to give you an idea, okay, at this time span you have had warnings, at this time span you have had errors, and would help you drill down better and figure out what's going wrong in your issues. We also shipped a brand new query builder that helps you better architect or structure your queries that you would want to be run. And you can string multiple queries, you can add a new formula, you can make all the old features, all the old things that you loved about in the old SigNoz Explorer are still here, but this time they're just like bigger and better, and you can actually figure out better by exploring the product. Okay, this is what is there and this is what's not there. You have multiple visualizations that you can use. You can go through a simple search if you just want a simple search and not like the entire complexity of a query builder. Also, we added a bunch of new enhancements that whenever you now click on a log, you get a much better parsed window, which tells you, okay, these are the details of your logs. This is what you can do. This is the body. These are the attributes you have done. And while you're inside this, you can also figure out, okay, hey, you can filter a value out or filter a value in, all from this exact same UI, and you don't have to like worry too much about going into different screens or like having to retain multiple different contexts from different places. It's all kind of simplified, and one of the main pillars that we're trying to build at SigNoz is essentially establishing a strong way to correlate all the three types of signals that make up the basic pillars of observability. And this is just the first step of doing a job at that, right? There are quite a few design decisions that were interesting to consider. I would talk about like maybe one of them right now. So when you click on a log, it expands, right? And there was a quite a interesting conversation that we have had around why do we want it to open a side panel? Why can't we not open it inline in the window itself? So two considerations for that. First, there's a lot of data that is associated with a single log line, right? So when you expand it, you have the body, you have the past attributes. I should be able to give you a place to see the actual JSON of the body. There should be to see the context of what that thing is actually doing, right? Now, when we think about like whenever we have to think about a scenario that we want to expand the log line inline, right? The thing is, we probably wouldn't be able to accommodate this much data that we're showing the side panel when it's opening inline. And if I open it inline, you see a certain amount of data, and you have to click again to open like a more detailed view, which has everything associated with it. Is that a good trade-off? So when we ship this with a side panel today, I don't know. Like in hindsight, it might not be the best decision. We might have to think about going with a hybrid approach or a better approach. But as of now, this is one of the approaches we went with because we felt it's much more relevant for the user when they click on a log to see all details associated with it instead of just like having some. So this was one of the questions that we had to address frequently while designing for developer tooling. How do you balance discoverability versus more data density? How do you actually optimize for ease of use versus showing more relevant context or relevant information? And I don't think there are like
I think you have also you also talked about the simple query builder and like this advanced query builder and the simple query builder.
Mhm.
What was the thought process behind this? Because I think earlier we in SigNoz we only had like the advanced view, and then
Mhm.
we introduced a simpler way for users to search and filter it.
Yeah, so to answer that question, I think it boils down again to another really subjective question. And to all of these questions that we are raising now, there are no really right or wrong answers. It all depends on the context in which you're asking the question and what trade-offs you're willing to make to actually, help the user get their job done in the most efficient way possible.
Hmm.
Uh, a big part of that is also stems from having an opinion about how you feel observability tools should work and how they should be used. And at certain times, you have to kind of come to the question and figure out, okay, do I just make it simple enough or do I add a ton of configurability? And I think that's never an either or question.
Yeah, I think especially because product like SigNoz, we see very early stage companies using us, and even like big enterprises, like 1,000 people, 2,000 people enterprises using us, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, so I think when the question of simplicity versus configurability comes in, I think we should. There's one loose rule I think we can follow as a general rule of thumb, and that is essentially ki, if somebody who is new to observability, who is just starting to say use SigNoz, it should be really easy for them to get started and start sifting through the logs. They should be able to explore the logs in this part of the product because that's what it's meant for, right? There shouldn't be like we shouldn't architect our features in a way that there's a lot of gatekeeping around. Okay, you have to know to this certain level, or oh, you have to absolutely watch a tutorial to figure out how this tool should be used. When you're just starting out and using a tool, it should be easy as snapping a finger for you to get started and use what you have been using for a while. And then it should also give you options to extend it far beyond what the current simple view is capable of. However, sometimes you have to think about different trade-offs. Okay, uh, in this scenario, of course, I can make it more simple, and of course, I can make it more configurable. But what if making it more configurable is not really a useful thing that the user is looking forward to, right? And at that point, you have to figure out, okay, if these are my trade-offs at this point in the particular product, what trade-off can I make? What is the best trade-off that would end up having a really good effect on the end user?
yeah, I think it also depends upon the choice of persona. For example, bigger companies will need much more configurability, but even for bigger companies, right? So, and this I've seen working with customers that they want to get started very quickly, and even though they want configuration once they're like familiar with the product, but if you give them all the configuration options upfront when they're just starting, it would be an overwhelming thing for them, right? So I don't think like simplicity is a trade-off. It's like it should be simple, but there should be a path for it to be like more configurable. Like there should be a path which user should be able to discover that hey, if I want to do certain more advanced things,
Mhm.
how I can do that, right?
Right, fair. I think that. So I had read a blog some time back called "How Having a Settings Page is Not Exactly a Design Failure." And if I'm not wrong, it was probably a blog by the team at Linear. And this
Mhm.
blog was essentially about, okay, there would be a bunch of things that you wouldn't want to ship right away because, for certain reasons, the experience of a certain set of users would be like suboptimal. And but at the same time, you shouldn't restrict users who would want that thing to not be able to like flip it on at any point in time, right?
Yeah.
Like the entire the entire reason your computer comes with brightness and volume controls is some because when you're using a product like that, certain things are subjective and certain things are also dependent on the circumstance and the context and the way the user is using it based on the task they want to achieve, right? In the environment they're setting to actually achieve that. So I think that's a big notion as to why the settings page should always exist, especially in a more slightly complex,
Mhm.
data dense product and a niche tool like ours, which probably does not. And yeah, what I'm essentially trying to boil down to is like niche complex tools like ours, like SigNoz, probably do not lend well to when you think about how you would design an interface for, say, a consumer app, say a language learning app,
Yeah.
for that matter.
Yeah.
So most of the UX laws or whatever mental model you would have at the back of your mind, you'd have to start thinking completely afresh when you're designing a platform like SigNoz, right? Because it's much more data dense. And at the end of the day, we don't have to optimize for keeping people stuck on that platform. Like we don't want people spending more time on their SigNoz dashboard, right? Unless they have to. And whenever they have to come and have to solve their problem, it's just our job to make it as easy as possible for them.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point you're making. So, in a way, design also depends upon what's the goal of the product, right? For example, in a product like Facebook, the goal is to keep users on Facebook the maximum amount of time. So you have notifications, you have different clicks which you can do, or the infinite scroll. Like infinite scroll is the innovation which like enables you to like just keep scrolling and like just keep spending time on that. While with SigNoz, that's not the goal. Our goal is to make developers and DevOps engineers more productive. So in a way, spending more time is not our KPI. If they're spending more time in SigNoz and like not, that
That's a
essentially
design
means that
failure
they're
for
not.
us.
That's a design failure. Yeah. So they're not able to figure out what they want to do, and that's not a good thing. So
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point, which I have not thought about in this way. That fundamentally the goal of the product is very different. You don't
Exactly.
want people.
So which is why whenever I'm designing a tool like SigNoz, and I know usually the idea is, okay, user should be able to do it in the fewest number of clicks, or user should be able to do it in the fewest number of steps. I think with tools which are like tools and not just places you just keep scrolling. With tools, you have to maintain a good balance between okay, if this is something that would take a little bit of time, would take a little bit of this is a little bit of a complicated flow. It should be easy for the user to just visit the docs or figure out in some easier way how to do it. But we don't have to account for the fact okay, we should be like spoon feeding the user, and I think that's a very wrong conception that we sometimes have, that the users are dumb. I mean, they are smart, which is why they're using a complicated product like SigNoz, right? So we would have to give due credit to where they can. We know that that if they really need this feature, they'll be able to figure out how to use it, right? For example, if you are deleting a team, I shouldn't make that like really easy. You shouldn't be able to do that with like the fewest number of clicks, right? So at the end, all of these things like doing it the fewest number of clicks, the simplest flow, they're all subjective based on what the user actually wants to do. And unless we crack that and we figure out, okay, this is how the user actually wants to do it, and this is how we want them to actually accomplish this. I think the conversation with that as a context is very different from having the conversation, hey, they need to spend more time on our product.
Got it. So we talked about a lot about users and what they are trying to do. What has been your experience working with an open source project, right? Like SigNoz, which has like a lot of users who use us regularly and sometimes very vocal about what they want to see in the product and not see in the product. So yeah, talk a bit about that.
As an engineer myself, I know how difficult it is to design for engineers. And but the cool thing here is, in a way, there's a lot of dogfooding because I use a lot of the product I design myself in some capacity or the other. But besides, SigNoz being an open source project has been a tremendous help because because whenever now you need feedback, you can simply go and like your step zero to research and figure out what users want is to go through a SigNoz repository and see all the open source issues that have been filed by people who use SigNoz, right? And that's a big entry point in defining how we define our feature roadmap. Okay, what needs to come in the product, what is not super useful, what can be improved, and what needs to be simply stripped out. Like having an open source community and having people offering you feedback without you having to go to them and explicitly asking for it all the time simplifies the entire flow really well. Have actionable feedback that you want to work on. For example, when we started revamping the SigNoz dashboard, like the first place to go for feedback was essentially the GitHub issues, right? And we see, okay, the users want this or they do not want this, and so on and so forth. And that gives us a pretty good metric as to what we should optimize for, what we should build next. And having a community like that also helps you get easier access to engineers who would be willing to answer your questions as to how you can make their experience better. So overall, like, it has been a really fun experience working with working with the open source project, working with open source contributors, and also having
But
this
also
feeling that
very tough. Also very tough, right? Because
that is what I was
I know, like
arriving at next, like working with users who are not inhibited in any way for giving their feedback. Like, they would call a spade, and you'd have to figure out a way to actually deal with what you feel at that time seeing that. But obviously,
yeah,
if they've said it bluntly, it obviously makes things much easier because you don't have to coax information
sure,
out in some
yeah,
way. So yeah, that really
cool.
helps.
So what's next? Like what are you working on next? Give us a glimpse of that.
So I don't. I wouldn't share work in, like, a lot of these different things that you're working on. They're really fun, but a lot of work in progress I wouldn't share yet, because if the end result ends up looking drastically different from what I'm showing now, we might be not bothered. Okay, you're sure this, but to ship this, and I don't want to have that, like, sort of disparity in delivery and expectation. So essentially, we are revamping the entirety of the SigNoz dashboard as our users know it today, right? We're working on improving the way you see traces. We are improving the way you see metrics. We're improving the way dashboards get rendered. We're trying to, push the boundaries of what shareable configurations can look like in a tool like ours. And since our tool is OpenTelemetry native, it's all based on based on open standards. We have to make sure we build standards which are also compatible with other tools, right? And make sure everything is extensible, and like, extensibility is a very big dream of mine. And we're working on some really cool ways to, correlate signals, extend your product in the way you see fit, and then building on top of that to give you a much better experience. But Log Explorer is just part of the things that we are releasing this week. There are tons more things. There are tons of better things lined up, and I'm hoping that we're going to do another one of these launch weeks pretty soon, where we talk about way more interesting things and, like, more improvements in the product.
Yeah. So looking forward to the next launch week, and all the best. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Pranay. It's great having being here and actually talking about the way we have been designing our SigNoz, and it's been a pleasure. And I hope our users like what we are shipping today and the entire course of this week, and we'd love to hear more from you.
Cool. Bye bye.